Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of Dunswell Zoo. I hope you have enjoyed a little bit of a change in content recently. You can see on screen these are the materials. They've gone now. They were the materials for the giant otter habitat, and this is sort of the footprint. Footprint remains the same. Materials change slightly. You can see here the red is where I'm going to put the house. The mud is where I'm going to put the offshore paddock. The rock is the big lake, and the sand rather, is the shallow lake. And let me start off by saying that we don't really stick to this plan. This habitat is an absolute nightmare. It doesn't end up like my initial idea, the original image I had in mind, or the concept drawing that I'd made. There was underwater viewing. We don't get to do that, unfortunately. I spend a fair amount of time trying to get it to work, and I just can't find a design that I'm happy with and that works with the terrain. So we'd go for something a little bit more simple in terms of viewing. We do unfortunately sacrifice that underwater viewing, but I've kept it in just to show you that it doesn't always work like the first, the second, the third, or even the fourth time. You just got to keep at it until you find something that you are happy with, or until you figure out a way how to do it. It's not going to always work the first time, or even the second time, or the third, or the fourth time. I am happy with the end result, though, I will say that much. It's not what I'd envisioned, but it's not like a million miles off either, so I'm happy with it. It's alright. So the habitat really was based on a few different real-world habitats in zoos for giant otters. Ultimately, due to the changes what I end up making, it ends up being primarily based off Chester Zoo, and a few elements from my own sort of plans and inspiration and things like that. As far as the habitat's concerned, size-wise, it is more than big enough for the giant otters, so hopefully we can get some breeding going and have a nice, decent-sized family group of giant otters. You can see there, I've just abandoned the underwater viewing gallery at that moment. There was nothing else I could do with it. So I've moved on to the house, and the house does remain in this position, but we increase the size a little bit to allow for some additional features, and you'll see those additional features a bit later on in the time lapse. But the design for the house more or less stays the same, so it's one thing that hasn't changed at least. So as I said, it's based on Chester Zoo, and they have an underwater viewing area inside in their heated pool, and that's what I'm trying to emulate here. Obviously we do increase the size of that shortly, but for now it's just getting the basics in. But yeah, all in all, with all the different changes what I had to make and fine tuning and things like that, it took about a week, this habitat, which is one of the longer projects for Dunswell Zoo. I don't usually take that long to make a habitat. It's usually like 4 days, maybe most. But just the building for this took nearly a week. So yeah, it was one of the more difficult ones, I'll be honest. I struggled with it a bit, but obviously you're watching the episode now, so something worked out. I apologise if you can hear a child screaming in the background. It is my neighbour's feral child. There's nothing I can do about it, regrettably. Anyway, so yeah, I wanted the giant otters here. There are a few sort of what I would call big ticket animals in this sort of back corner of the Pantanal section. You've got your giant otters are going to go here. Then you've got the jaguar complex, which is going to be in a couple of episodes' time. And you've got reptiles at risk, which is going to have the Galapagos tortoise and the red-footed tortoise and the yellow-footed tortoise and the Orinoco crocodile and butterflies, and there's a lot going to be going on there. But in particular, obviously, because it's the Pantanal wetlands, the animals that have this sort of specialism, shall we say, for aquatics, for wetlands, they're the ones that need to shine the most. So this giant otter habitat needs to A, function, and B, look the part. You know, it needs to look like it is specialised for aquatic animals, and hopefully the end result is definitely that. There is a lot of water in this habitat. Obviously you've got the indoor heated pool, and then we have a massive outdoor lake as well, which allows them to deep dive and things like that. But yeah, it was an absolute nightmare. Having said that, if need be, there is room for another species. Not in this habitat, because giant otters generally aren't mixed with other species, and in the game they don't have any interspecies enrichment. But we can shrink this habitat if need be to fit another animal in. That's how big it ends up being, which is always fine with me. I'd rather give the animals more room and then have to shrink it later, rather than not give them enough and find somewhere to expand to. And this is also probably, in my own opinion, the most realistic habitat I've built so far. So there are only two exceptions I can think of that stops this habitat from being the most realistic one I've built so far. And that is, there's no dedicated keeper area, and usually there would be some sort of segregated area for the keepers to enter, you know, the house and the habitat and things like that. And then the other exception would be there's no isolation area. So you've got a cubbing den, and you've got a sort of the main area for the giant otters, but there isn't anywhere to sort of shut the giant otters away for veterinary treatment or to be moved to another collection, stuff like that. They're the only two things in this habitat that stop it from being the most realistic habitat I've built so far. So I'm quite proud of that, actually. Yeah, that's all I can really say about the habitat at this point in time. You can ignore this terrain work, we don't keep it. I think it's actually due to change in just a second. There we go, yeah. Go back to this underwater viewing, and I've got it to work, but I just don't like how it looks. It just looks so obtrusive and boring. So I get rid of it. I thought, as much as I would love underwater viewing, this just isn't the place for it. So we'll do it later on, I think, with some of the other species. And of course we'll be doing underwater viewing for the Orinoco crocodile. But that's inside, so we don't need to worry too much about that. But yeah, it's in this process actually that I encountered a problem with the grid system, and you'll see it just there. Is that when you put a piece, like a panel piece, on top of a gridded piece, they don't line up. Despite position snap being on, and angle snap and all that lot, they don't line up, and I don't understand why. But yeah, I'm just lining this up to create a ramp to cover the slope, but unfortunately there's still some bits that stick out, and I don't want it to look ridiculous, which it does there. So we do just scrap it. But it just goes to show that things that seem great in concept just don't really work out too well in the game. Either, like in this case, it's because of the location of the habitat and the path that's already there and the terrain constraints and stuff like that. In other instances, it might be my skill level or your skill level, depending if you're building anything and encountering similar problems. And that's why I keep it in, really, is to show you that this isn't like I'm that good at building, I only need to do it once thing. Yeah, that's not the case at all. Yeah, I'm just as flawed as everyone else in that regard. Anyway, so I'll talk a little bit about what's coming up for the next few episodes. So the next episode was going to be the ocelot, but having struggled with the size of this habitat in terms of how big to make it and the viewing and stuff like that, I've decided we're going to go for reptiles at risk next, and I can get it done in, I think, one episode probably. It should be pretty straightforward. It's just a rectangular building with a roof on it, and then 3 habitats and some exhibits inside. It's nothing particularly enthralling, but yeah, hopefully I can get that done in one episode. Then once Reptiles at Risk is built, I know how much room we're going to have then at that point for the pampas deer and the ocelot. We're going for the ocelot simply because that's the mod that's available. I probably might swap it out for a margay or an oncilla if we ever get mods for them. In fact, do we have mods for them? Let me just check. No, we don't have mods for them, I was correct. Yeah, we'll probably swap the ocelots for the margay or the oncilla at some point in the future. Although ocelots are the more commonly kept of those 3 in captivity, I just prefer the oncilla and the margay to the ocelot. I think they're just a bit more characterful and a bit more niche, even though, you know, they're relatively common in the wild. The least concern, I think, off the top of my head, without researching it, I'd have to say they're probably least concern. I know the ocelot's least concern, so there's that. And then the jaguar complex. Then the marsh deer after the ocelot, and then it's the jaguar complex, and then that'll be the pantanal probably finished. Oh no, actually we've got it's not the pantanal, but we've got the southern poodoo to build for as well in Adventure Andes, and then I think we're doing the jaguar. Yeah, I think that's it. Anyway, back to the habitat we're building. So here I'm doing the indoor area for the giant otters, and the larger area of the 2 is just for the general group of otters, and the smaller area is the breeding den, so where the female would go to have her cubs. It's just a bit smaller, it's a bit easy for the keepers to sort of access, and you can shut off access to the main lake and just keep the indoor area, or have the indoor area and the offshore paddock, stuff like that. So a bit about the giant otters then. They're a large semi-aquatic mammal, in case you hadn't guessed, that lives in the Amazon River Basin and the Pantanal wetlands, found in South America, of course. It has thick, velvety brown fur, and it has sort of characteristic white markings around its neck. Giant otters have webbed feet and a long tail that's adapted to swimming. Males and females aren't really sexually dimorphic. They tend to be the same size, but there is a weight difference. Males tend to weigh between sort of 25 and 33 kilos, whereas females tend to range between 21 and 27 kilos roughly. Giant otters are unfortunately endangered. In the past they have been hunted intensely for fur, and that is unfortunately a problem that still exists in the present day. However, the greatest risk facing otters in the wild today is the loss of habitat due to deforestation and the pollution of their waters. Of course, being semi-aquatic and eating pretty much exclusively sort of fish and crustaceans and things like that, they're really impacted by water pollution, so it's drastically affecting their numbers, and they're now their population is in, how can I describe it? They're not spreading, so the populations that exist now in the wild are the only populations that there are. You know, there aren't pockets sort of elsewhere. So the habitats that they live in really do need to be preserved and reconstructed if necessary as best as possible and cleaned up. As far as social aspects are concerned, giant otters live in family groups, usually made up of a dominant pair and their young, which would typically in the wild be the litter from that year and the previous litter as well. The bond within these groups are very strong, and individuals are often very cooperative with each other. They typically can have anywhere between 1 and 5 young in a litter. The average is 2. They're born blind with grey fur, and their eyes open about a month after they're born, sort of 28-31 days, somewhere around there. They can move independently at about 50 days, and then somewhere between 60 and 70 days they will venture out of the burrow and swim for the first time. It's always really exciting to see. And when the offspring reach sexual maturity, which is around 2 years of age, they begin to distance themselves from the family group, or in some cases they're violently expelled by the dominant partner. Young males and females will leave their family group behind and the territory. They don't just leave the group and move a few meters down the river, they'll leave the territory as well. And they will search for another unmatched otter, settle in a new territory and breed, and thus the circle of life continues. And giant otters are monogamous. They have the same partner for all their lives, which is really nice. So the 2 we have here, they will stay with us until they pass on, hopefully with their family, and then we will get some fresh blood in later down the line. But hopefully that will be a lot later down the line, because we've only just got the otters, so I can't see them going anywhere for a while. We have a male and a female. I cannot, off the top of my head, remember their names. You will probably find out in the next episode. Yeah. What else can I tell you about giant otters? So they can be found in groups of up to, I think it's 40 individuals, which is an awful lot of giant otters. But it's speculated that these numbers are probably from different groups sharing a territory in order to feed. So you're looking at a group being maybe about 15 individuals. In the game, it's 2 to 15, maximum of 9 males or 9 females in a mixed group. Female bachelor group anywhere between 2 and 6, and a male bachelor anywhere between 2 and 9. Again, no interspecies enrichment. They're found in tropical, aquatic and temperate biomes within South America. They prefer temperature ranges of between 10 and 42 degrees Celsius. So most of the giant otters in captivity in Europe and North America probably get a bit chilly because it does drop to below 10. Not every day, of course, sort of like the beginning of the year and the end of the year. Autumn and winter, that's when you get your real sort of temperature plunges. Of course, as I've already said plenty of times, we have the indoor heated pool and a heated indoor cubbing den and a heated indoor area. Both the indoor area and the cubbing den have access to that offshore paddock, which will serve as a nursery area for the young pups learning to swim before they're allowed into the heated pool and the large outdoor lake. Guests can view the main lake from ground level from a number of different viewing opportunities, which you are yet to see, but you will see them, don't worry. Pretty soon, we're about halfway through now. And they'll also be able to see them from an elevated viewing platform at the back of the enclosure. This platform is also the location for the educational talks, where the educators will be able to throw fishy treats in for the giant otters, whilst also educating guests about the plight of the giant otter in the wild. You can see here I'm just starting to create a fence, a custom fence. There are quite a few custom fences in this build actually. So this one is no viewing whatsoever. So you can't look through this fence at all. And this is to give the offshore paddock some privacy. And then I make a real rookie error here. So I get all these into position and then I copy and paste, forgetting that the concrete piece is a grid piece, so I can't group them together because it's classed as a separate grid each time. So I have to go through each group and recolour them because I copy them all as sort of green. See here, I'm just changing that space a little bit, just giving a little bit more space between the bamboo fence and the chain fence, just so we can put some planting in there and some additional sort of privacy for the otters. We don't want them getting stressed by lots of people. And then this goes right up to the house. And there's me realising that I can't group them all together, so I'm going to have to change them all individually. And we go for this golden colour. It's slightly different to the normal bamboo you can get in the game. And I just lower them all a little bit. Then planting back here, I decided to go for bamboo, and I use some modded bamboo called golden bamboo. We do have a tree in there, I think, as well, actually, or maybe a bit further along. But yeah, I go for that bamboo. Now, the planting in this part is inspired by Yorkshire Wildlife Park. The giant otters have bamboo in their enclosure, and they are unbothered by it. They don't pull at it, they don't do anything to it, they just leave it be. Here we're putting in a secondary boundary just to stop guests from knocking and banging and touching and doing things they shouldn't be to the enclosure. And this is a fence from a blueprint called the Wooden Fence Pack, unsurprisingly. And I just chose this one because it does what I need it to do. It's low, but it's bulky. It's not going to take your attention away from the otters, but it's noticeable enough that it acts as an appropriate deterrent. You know, you're not going to put your arms over this barrier to attempt to touch the otters. But we end up putting another fence in anyway, so it doesn't really matter. We don't replace this one. We've got another fence for the habitat itself. And you can see that just there actually. We're bringing that chain, we've put it all the way around, that chain link fence, and we're bringing it closer to the curb at certain points and putting glass panels in there so the guests get a better view of the otters. And we do some more a bit further around as well, but they're not quite as close to the curb as these two. Again, just screening this area off. Part of it's for decoration and part of it is for privacy. So you don't want people to be able to see the otters in the offshore den. That's simply because it could stress the animals out, or there could be something wrong with one of the otters and they need medical attention, things like that. So you always want your offshore facilities to be exactly that, really, which is offshore. Putting that fence in here, just connecting it to there. Same story here. It doesn't need much in the way of finesse because you can always adjust things. So we go ahead and put some more bamboo in, because why not? I go quite bamboo mad with this actually. But it looks fine. I'm relatively happy with the outside of the habitat and the inside. It's just, I would have liked some underwater viewing because that would have been a real crowd drawer and it would have sort of set the habitat apart from everything else in this area. But not to worry. We can maybe get some underwater jaguar viewing perhaps because they can deep dive. We're going to have 3 opportunities to do that because we're going to have 3 jaguar enclosures. One for a breeding pair and then the other 2 enclosures are going to be retired individuals. So they've been part of the breeding program or they've been rescued from appalling conditions and we've given them a home here where they can live out the rest of their days. So just building up this hill here, some additional ways to stop people from viewing the offshore area. Again, shrinking that lake just a little bit and flattening this back bit out because I wanted the back of the habitat to look like a riverbank. And so we go for these mud walls by Zoo, and we use all 3 designs and they do look the part in the end. First time I've ever used these, I haven't used them in any other habitats. because it's on a slope, things get complicated. Like the fencing, because it's on a slope, that looked complicated, and it was complicated. The curbing was quite complicated, maintaining the same level. See, I smooth it down, I flatten it, I smooth it down, I flatten it, just to get that nice crisp edge. And then I decide, okay, I'm going to have a little platform that juts out here, and this is where people can view the giant otters from above. There's a little waterfall just to the left of it that's going to go in. It's a nice viewing opportunity. It's nice and serene. Not really away from the hustle and bustle, because it's one of the main paths, this one. It's an 8 metre. This changes a few times. I can't get a path configuration that I'm happy with until, eventually I do. Because that just doesn't jut out enough for me. And smoothing it out doesn't work. So I end up deleting the path, I think. And then re-adding it in on a grid, so it's much easier to implement. Yeah, because that was just turning it round. It wasn't having it. So this platform changes a fair bit in design. It ends up being a square. I just don't like how it was connecting with the path, to be honest. And then leveling it out didn't look great. So if in doubt, start from scratch. That would be my advice there. But yeah, these sort of mud walls look great. And then the sand I've just put in there is the shallow pool and the waterfall. Here I'm just sloping this lake out to give some variation in depth. I've already put the waterfoil in. I've already put the waterfall in. It's part of a blueprint that I have sort of adapted and changed for my own requirements, my own purposes. So get the water in, and you can see there's some planting around the habitat now, or on the outside anyway. And then there's some terrain work, some terrain painting, and the fence is in at the back, as is the viewing area. Time to get rid of the words giant otter. So I go for a sort of greenish coloured water. There is some filtration implied with the waterfall and things like that. Now we're going to start on the actual habitat itself. The lake, the planting, the enrichment, stuff like that. The little things that will make it go pop. So again, we have to redo the water, and I repaint it so it's got a mud bottom rather than a grass bottom. And we could put some faux rocks in, as well as some of these willow trees. I really like the willow tree sort of design that's in. It's not a designed willow tree, obviously it's natural, but the way the willow tree is being incorporated into the design of the giant otter habitat at Chester Zoo, and there's this log thing structure as well. Yeah, I just sort of dot some faux rocks about just to make it look a bit different. It doesn't look like just a hole in the ground. Put some planting in, some faux rock work. Nothing particularly exciting, just stuff to make it a bit natural. Getting this to work was difficult but doable. Put one of the flatfish feeders in, some food enrichment, some underwater toy enrichment, because we want to encourage the otters to explore their habitat as much as possible. So initially I tried sticking to the plants that they would encounter in the wild, but also considering the fact that this zoo is in the UK, rather than going for the eelgrass, I went for the the hydrilla grass, sorry. I went for that instead. Can't get another one of these floating platforms in, so I abandoned that idea. And then we put this arch in to make it look like the lake is separated into two parts. It isn't, of course, they can swim underneath. And then back here, just putting some more of that planting in. This time we are relatively keeping with the plants that these animals would encounter in the wild. But then we start drifting back towards slightly more European plants. Because, we are in the United Kingdom, in Dunswell Zoo, so we would use what's available if possible. And I think Chester are a great example of that. They do have some authentic planting in terms of trees that aren't found in the UK, and animals would encounter these in the wild. They do have some of that, and it's very well done. But they also have, like the giant otter habitat, for example, it's all like native planting in there, and it looks really nice, native to the UK, of course. So all I'm doing here is putting some buffalo grass in and just adjusting it so that it's not on these little mud sort of trails that the otters will have worn from running, because they're very active otters. They don't just like go in the water and out the water and lounge about. They spend a lot of time grooming and a lot of time vocalising and socialising, and certainly all the times I've seen giant otters, they've been very active, running round the enclosure, vocalising, playing with enrichment, eating. They're not just laid in one place. So I wanted to give the habitat that look, that it's well established. So there's these trails that the otters will usually follow, and where there aren't trails, this grass is sprouted. We do have to include some of the Planet Zoo grass, of course, from the terrain paint, but it blends in quite nicely in the end, I think. How long's left? Oh, about 3 minutes. So I don't think there's much else left for me to say, really. I guess just thank you for watching. Remember to like and subscribe. Remember to have your notifications enabled so you don't miss another video. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at JW_YT. I apologise if I'm a bit quiet in this episode. There are other people in the house, and I've also got a sore throat. I hope my tonsillitis isn't coming back. What else? Instagram and Twitter at JW_YT. Like, subscribe, notifications. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed. Remember to stay safe, stay kind, enjoy the cinematics, and I shall see you all in the next episode. Until then, my friends, bye-bye for now. can.